factor for the increase in population is African culture, religious beliefs, right? Now, this is a very interesting point. African culture and religious beliefs, two variables, are very, very important in terms of how we begin to understand the population growth in the continent. And these two factors really separate the continent from the rest of the world because of the unique nature of the African culture, the unique beliefs of the African people. So it says here, most African cultures have large families in the range of 5 to 7 children per family. And this is particularly true, right? It says here, this is particularly true in the rural areas. In the rural areas, you have larger families. In the urban areas, you don't have as much because of the cost of living, the expenses of sending children to school, and maybe daycare opportunity. So those things are considered if you live in the urban area, but not so if you live in the rural areas, right? So the rural areas, the families are larger, and this is an expectation. And then it says here, since most of the rural dwellers are farmers, they need children to assist them to farm, either as subsistence farmers, right? That is, farming just to sustain themselves and their families, or commercial farmers, right? Etc. So, but either way, they need hands. They need hands on the farm. They need assistance on the farm. And how do you get assistance? You don't hire people. You just have children. And once they're ready, they go to the farm and assist you. Right? And this is the way of life for centuries for a lot of these African communities, especially in the rural areas. So large families have become an expectation. Of course, if you're having families, 5 to 6 children per family, that is adding significantly to the population. This is increasing the world population in a very significant way. So African culture, tradition, and expectation, and just the basic economic lay of the land will give rise to this type of family composition. 5 to 7 children per family. Now let's move on. It says here, additionally, with the lack of social programs. Now this is also an important point. Please take note. The lack of social programs to support parents in their old age. Large number of children are seen as safety nets to support them in their old age. Let's talk about this for a minute. Let's use Canada as an example. There are a lot of social programs for families and for citizens that are getting old. Most people work, they have pensions, right? They have pensions, so they rely on their pensions, they don't rely on their children. Especially parents who were born and raised in this country or came to this country early, they have worked their entire life. They have good pensions, right? They have good pensions, benefits after retirement and so forth. They don't need their children financially. They don't need their children financially for the most part. Again, there are exceptions here and there. But in general, that's not the case. But that is the case in most African societies. Because, especially again, for those that live in the rural areas, there is no pension package. Because perhaps they didn't work. If they worked in informal economy, precarious, type of work that they didn't have pension packages and benefits and so forth. So this is the way they intend to survive in their old age, to have as many children as possible, so that the children some will be rich, some will be well-to-do, they will come back and support them in their old age until they die of it, etc. This is the thinking. And we cannot discount this because this is real. This is thinking amongst a lot of communities and a lot of families, a lot of culture on the continent. All right, so it says here, let me say it again, lack of social programs. Now, I was talking about Canada earlier. Canada, when you turn 65, right? When you turn 65, if you're a citizen, if you're a permanent resident, you get money from the government. And this is not pension money. It's called old age security money. That is the money given by the government to older Canadian senior citizens for turning 65. Now, of course, there are calculations. You have to have been here for 40 years, above 18 years of age, right, to get the full amount of that money. If you have been here 20 years above the age of 18 and you turn 65, you get prorated, right? But nevertheless, you're getting money. Again, not so. This is the social programs I was talking about. Not so in African societies. The government doesn't give money in that sense. They have to find a way to survive. All right. He says here, most African cultures live in polygamy. This is another factor. And this ties in with what we were talking about in terms of culture. Polygamy, which is typically a man married to several women at the same time. Polygamy. This is a culture, the cultural laws and norms and so forth allow for polygamy, right? And so, for example, if a man has 2, 3 wives, the expectation is he will have 2, 3 children by each wife, and that's 9 children right there. That's 9 children, 6 to 9 children right there, right, etc. So all of this is adding to the population increase, and some religious beliefs also allow for polygamy as well, adding to the population increase on the continent. There is also a religious aspect to this, and that is the belief against family planning or contraceptives that have been promoted by most Western governments in Africa as a means of population control. Now, there's resistance in this area, right? So there's cultural resistance to family planning, right? They say, wait a minute now. We know how to plan our family. You don't have to impose your beliefs on us, etc. Right? So again, the African tradition usually is the more children, the better. That's the idea, right? For a number of reasons. It's seen as respect. It's seen as man is able to take care of his family. It's seen as respect and give status in society, etc. Those are all norms and nuances that exist on the continent, right? So there's resistance to family planning, and then social norms and religious teachings mostly forbid undertaking of such, right? So again, they'll say, well, no, we don't believe in contraceptives. For example, religious beliefs. We don't believe in contraceptives. We don't believe in family planning. And so they have as many children as possible. And then also it says here, and this is an interesting point, it says here, male opposition to contraception also discourages women from taking contraceptives to avoid unwanted pregnancies, right? Now, again, it's a male-dominated society, as most societies are, and this is very prevalent in the way that Africans move on in this regard. Very prevalent and very evident, as we can see, and research bear this out, right? So male opposition, right? Because if the man and the woman are in agreement, well, then you have no problem. But usually that is not the case. An agreement in terms of in this area, but that's usually not the case. All these factors contribute to the increase in population of the continent. So we look at the religious aspect to it, which is very critical for us to understand the role it plays in the increase of population on the continent. It believes against family planning. Now, again, the Western ideas, they're really pushing these ideas on the continent. Some governments are receptive to it, but by and large, most of the governments say, no, we have our own idea of family planning. We have our idea of family planning, and we will stick to those ideas and so forth. Most of the African governments are resisting and pushing back. Right? So again, social norms and social and religious teachings forbid undertaking of such contraception, etc. So when we look at the cultural, African culture and religious beliefs, we begin to understand within the context of population increase why this is happening. And because the continent is heavily cultural, the continent is heavily religious, one form of religion or the other, this is impacting population increase and how they view family planning.